Good morning. Welcome to the accessibility training. My name's Tony Ponte. I'm the web administrator here at Texas Education Agency. And today we're going to go over how to make your Word and PDF documents accessible. All right, so for this training, please stay muted and hold your questions until the end. I'll have some time at the end of this presentation if you have any questions. Also, this is going to consist of a presentation, then I'm going to do a practical demo on a Word document and a PDF document on making those accessible. Also, just keep in mind this training is recorded and it's going to be available online to be used as a reference. All this could be found on our resource page. You'll see the link at the bottom. It's tea.texas.gov/websites. Once you click on this site, it's going to bring you to a resource page for websites, TEA standards, web standards, and our accessibility standards. Under document accessibility, this is where our today's documentations can be found. We have the PowerPoint, we got the guidelines, we got a checklist, and the practice exercises as well. All right, so we're going to focus on Word today and Acrobat PDFs, making those accessible. The Word Microsoft Word is probably the de facto in word processing. It's really common to use. Also, the PDF, it's a really universal format for the web and for other documents. The nice thing is that these two work really well together. Whatever you do on a Word document, when you convert it over, when it comes to accessibility, all of that stays in the converted PDF format. So they work really well together. If you do everything correctly per all the web standards, accessibility standards on the Word document, all that should convert over really easy. So when we're talking about accessibility, to put it into one simple sentence, it's providing the same information to all users. When you break down what information means anything that's electronic, any electronic information, which includes web pages, emails, forms, applications, media, and especially documents, all kinds of documents like PDFs, Word documents, even PowerPoints and Excel. Anything that's electronic on the web needs to be accessible. The other key to this sentence is all users. If you need to specify what kind of users, it needs to be everyone, including people that don't have disabilities to people that do have disabilities. It includes everyone. Now, just keep in mind, some people might have one disability or they might have more than one. So it's always best to apply all your standards so it's accessible to all kinds of people with disabilities. Here at TEA, we follow the WCAG 2.0 AA level standard. What that means is it's a set of guidelines that are the international standards for web accessibility. However, since we are a state agency, we need to follow some other requirements like the Chapter 206 and 213 from the Texas Legislative, which is on the Texas Administrative Code, that aligns to Section 508, which is the federal government law, part of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And all that is also aligned to the WCAG standards. Like I mentioned, these are the international standards for anything that's on the web, anything that's electronic information. These guidelines provide different kinds of standards for that kind of information. Throughout the the training, you'll hear me say some words that you might not be familiar with. Um, these terminology terms all relate to accessibility. Alternate text or alt text, that's a short description for images or anything that's a visual element. Assistive technologies, that's any kind of software or hardware that assist individuals with disabilities to use a computer or any kind of electronic device. Section 508, that's the federal standard laws. The screen reader, this is a software application that enables people that can't see to access all the information on a computer. If you ever wondered how a blind person can use a computer, they're probably using a screen reader. It's going to read everything that it encounters back to them, and that's how they can interact with their computer. And of course, the WCAG 2.0, which is the standard for all web content. So when we start working with our documents, one thing you need to remember is keep accessibility in mind. That means whenever you're working in your Word document and you're typing a paragraph and inserting pictures, you can, right now in Word, there is the checker. The checker is it's a built-in checker that kind of starts checking for accessibility errors. It's not going to catch everything, but it's going to give you a good overview of what is missing or what needs to be fixed on your document. You don't have to wait till the end to start using your checker. You can start the checker right away when you start with your document. Also, plan your work properly. If you're gonna start creating a document that's maybe 30 pages long and it has images and has tables, you just probably want to figure the best way to put that in your document to be accessible. Like you don't want to have tables inside tables. If you're working with a lot of data like that, you want to probably split up your tables into separate simple tables. Also, use an accessibility checklist. There's one on the resource page you can download. It's got 7 important things to follow. That's good, so you can give yourself a checklist of what things to check for, and you can do that on a manual check. You don't have to rely on the checklist or the checker built in. The accessibility. A lot of people think once you start making changes or making your document accessible, it's going to change a lot of your formatting, the way you have it designed and laid out. Not necessarily. Most of the time, all the accessibility enhancements are done in the back end, and a lot of your formatting will not get touched or remodified. And also, when you're working in Word and you're making your document accessible, it's going to stay accessible. That means if you come back next week to make edits, all the stuff you've done to it, adding alt text and headings and whatnot, all that's going to stay. You don't have to start over from the beginning to make that accessible. Also, don't use shortcuts. A lot of times people are in a rush to get their documents finalized, and they might use shortcuts. One of the biggest shortcuts people use are text boxes. Text boxes are really problematic when it comes to screen readers because they kind of not provide the content in the logical order it needs to be, or sometimes it can just get missed altogether. And also, the one that probably is going to be the hardest to implement is breaking bad habits that are not accessible. And I'll talk about some of those right now. One of them is like table layouts. A lot of times people put text or information in tables that doesn't need to be in tables. So you don't want to put tables in a document if it's not related to data. Just keep in mind that tables should only be used for data sets and not for layouts. In this example, you can see somebody inserted sentences in different rows. I guess they were trying to achieve some kind of design, but in reality, that's just making it harder for screen readers to get to that content. So don't place any simple static content in tables. Just place them outside within the content. If you need to do anything that's relates to different layouts, you can use your columns. And that kind of gives you a way to format certain content into columns, and that's accessible. So that might be an option. Also, avoid bolding text for paragraph headings. This is good. You want to, you want to emphasize your headings, your main title, your section headings, which is good. But the way you do it makes a big difference. If you're just going in there making it bold and a bigger text, that is good for visual people. They can see that and make the differentiation. But for screen readers, it's not really helping. It's not doing anything for the screen readers. So you need to apply it correctly using the styles in your Word document. All right. So part of the keeping accessibility in mind is planning your work. A lot of times, something that starts off maybe as a Excel document starts to grow and they start putting content in the Excel spreadsheet. Just keep in mind, Excel is really meant for data sets. It's not the best format to make accessible. So if you have a lot of information to add to your data set, it might be better to use a Word document. Now Word has the ability to make the table sets more accessible than before, and that's going to help a lot with your document overall. Avoid watermarks. A lot of time people put watermarks. It's something that Word introduced a long time ago, but the reality is that font, that content, that information back there is not accessible. It can't be recognized by screen readers. Also, the light text might cause some issues where it can't be seen by people that are colorblind. So instead, what you want to do, if you want to emphasize that your document is a draft or a sample, you want to put that word somewhere in your content, especially before all the content starts. Now, when you do that, don't put it in your header or your footer, because that also gets missed by screen readers. You want to have draft somewhere where it can be seen by colorblind users, by visual users, by screen readers, and it's read by everyone. Text boxes. They're an easy way to add content to documents, but the content gets skipped by screen readers most of the time. And it also, if you have a text box you're using somewhere between the content, it's also going to throw that reading order in a different order. So it's not going to read it in the way you meant it to be read. So always consider, instead of using a text box, you might want to just put your content inside the document. And there's ways you can format your paragraph to look like a text box, right? So if you add a border to the paragraph in a shade, you can mimic it to look kind of like a text box, and it's going to be read by screen readers, and that's accessible compared to a text box. Underline text. You shouldn't underline text. Underline text should only be used for links. Anything that's a link should be underlined. If you're underlining text that's not links, you probably want to change that to making the text bold instead of underlined. That's kind of a universal way to know that this content is a link if it's underlined and people can click on it. Also, when you're working with links, depending on how you're formatting your links, they could be an issue. So make sure the color you're using, the format is accessible, and you should keep everything consistent. If you're using a certain color for the underline and the text color of a link, that might be missed by some colorblind users. So always keep that in mind. If you stick to the standard blue, most of the time that shouldn't be an issue unless you have some kind of background color on that link. Text and background color. One of the things that always gets missed with accessibility is color, which plays a big important part for accessibility. Just keep in mind that the color you're using for text needs to be accessible and needs to meet contrast, the color contrast ratios. So that means the background color and the text color need to be dark enough or enough contrast that someone with colorblind issues can recognize the text. Sometimes what happens, even though you're not using a background color, but just have it on your white paper, a certain font color might not be dark enough to meet those standard requirements. So always reconsider your text color. And always remember that if you're using color, it's good to test your color and your background. One of the best tools to use is the color contrast analyzer. What happens is it's this application right here, and it's a free download. There are links on the presentation. You can grab your for color. So I'll pick this green, and then I'll pick the background, which is a gray. And you can see it feels really bad. It kind of puts the contrast in a digital form so you can see what the ratio is, and the 1.7 to 1 is really bad. So this is a nice little tool to have, and you can use when you're working a lot with color so it can meet the accessible standards. Also, red is one of the colors that's really problematic for colorblind users. So if you do have to use red, I recommend using a really dark red so it can stand out for people with colorblind issues that have issues with the red color. Headers and footers. A lot of times people like using the headers and footers because you can put information in there, and it's really helpful for a lot of people. However, all this stuff in the headers and footers get missed. They get skipped by screen readers. They're not going to be able to see what you put in there. So the best thing to do is don't put anything critical to the content of the document in the headers or the footers. Things you can use headers and footers are for like repetitive logos or images or information that's not critical. Page numbers is good. Screen readers are able to know what page number you're on, so it's not critical that it knows what page if you're using page numbers for footers. Charts and graphs. So when you're working with a document and you're putting in charts, a lot of time people make the charts, they put it in, and they just leave it like that. And they might, if they do check the accessibility, it's going to flag it that it's missing the alt text, the description for that image. And lots of times they'll just go in there and just put the title of the chart, which is in this case, average 7th grade subject scores. And they think that's enough. However, don't use the chart's title as it's only alt text. And also, all the information in that chart needs to be conveyed and available to screen readers. So, this chart is representing information and data, and visual people can see the results. So you want to have all that information also available to screen readers. So make sure when you're working with graphs, the best and most accessible way to make a chart accessible is by actually typing in the text summary of the chart's data into the document itself. And you can place that above or below the chart. That way, when screen readers get to that information, they're going to read that summary and it's going to have all the data in there. And then if that's the case, you can also then make the whole chart decorative. So it doesn't have to read that chart because the information is already on the document. Surveys and forms, if you're working in a Word document making forms, it's probably not the best or most useful way to make a form. You want to consider something that's designated to make forms, some kind of tool. The Adobe Form Designer is one of them that is designed to make forms, and it has a lot of accessibility capabilities. Now, when we're working in a document, there's things that you have to make or do in your Word document to make it accessible. And these are kind of the 7 things that if you follow, your document will probably be about 99% accessible. So when you're working in Word, you want to give your document a title, but also include the title and the document's properties. You want to apply headings. You want to add alternate text, which is a description to all images and all visual objects. If you're using tables, use simple tables with table headers. And if you have links, make sure the links are descriptive enough for screen readers. And color is always important. Make sure there's enough contrast and you're not just conveying color with information with color. And the last thing is check for accessibility. However, like I mentioned, you don't want to do that at the end. You can start by checking accessibility with the checker. You click that, and once you start creating your documents, your content, it's going to flag it if it finds something wrong with it, and you can fix it right away. So titles. So everybody kind of knows the practical way to put your title on a document. It's either going to be the first top line or its own cover page, which is good. However, a lot of times people forget to add that same title into the properties. The properties is kind of the back end title. What happens there is once you add a title to the properties, that's going to assist the screen readers to know, hey, this is meant for screen readers. Screen readers are going to be able to recognize and know the title before they even start opening documents. So it's really useful for people that are using screen readers so they can know the title before they open it. Headings. Headings are really important to documents, especially the bigger the documents get, right? So if you have a 30-page, 40-page document, it's really going to be useful to use your headings correctly. What the headings do, they add a structure. They add a structure to your document, so it helps the screen readers kind of navigate the document. Think of it kind of like bookmarks. When you open up a document and it has the bookmarks, you're able to just go to certain sections and just get to that information. That's kind of how the headings work for screen readers. In Word, there's a styles ribbon where you can apply your headings, and I'll go over all this in the demo. And when you're using headings, you got to make sure you're nesting them correctly, meaning you're using your heading 1 before a heading 3 or a heading 2, and so on. And what I've noticed a lot is people use headings just because it kind of makes their content looks, the format changes the format to make it darker or bigger, which is okay, but you have to use it in the correct nested order. So for example, in this document here, we have the title, which is chapter 5, calculating 2018 ratings. Then we have a section called overview, another section called 2018 district ratings, and then we have a subsection of that called student achievement domain. Then it goes back to a bigger main section called 2018 campus ratings. So when you're working with headings, the first one you're going to use is your heading 1, and that's going to be your title to the document. And that should be the only heading 1 you apply in your document. Now for the subsections, the main sections after the title, those are going to be your heading 2s. Those kind of make the document go to the second level of the structure. And then if there's headings inside those headings, subheadings, those would be your heading 3s, and so on. Most of the time, heading 3s, heading 4s are probably the max of headings you got to use in a document most of the time. But it goes all the way up to 6 if you need to apply those kind of headings to your document. Alt text. When you're inserting pictures, graphs, anything that's visual and representing information or data, you need to insert an alt text to that visual element. Most of the time it's I'm sorry. Most of the time when you see the picture, it has to kind of, if it's related to the content, you got to make sure that information from that alt text is conveying what it's trying to convey, right? So if it's something important to the content, you want to give it an alt text. It has to be concise and descriptive enough, right? If it's just something that's not conveying information, maybe like just a border, those can be marked decorative. They don't have to really say anything. When you're inserting pictures in the alt text, that conveys the intended description of the image in regards to the context. So let's take, for example, this picture here of George Washington. So if I'm writing a document and it's about the Revolution, it's a research paper, and I insert this on my document, a good alt text could be George Washington crossing the Delaware River, because that document, that content's related to George Washington and his accomplishments. If my document is about famous historical paintings, and I use this picture as an example, something I can use as an alt text is the painter Emilio Lutz, 1851 Washington crossing the Delaware masterpiece. If my document is about art and styles and techniques, and this picture is in there as an example because of the way it was painted, a good alt text could be artist Emilio Lutz uses light, form, color, perspective in his Washington crossing the Delaware oil on canvas painting. So we're using the same picture here, but depending on the context of our content, you want to have an alt text that relates to that. Tables. Two things to know about tables. When you're using tables, make sure it's a simple table and it's not a table for layout, meaning you're inserting a table so your format, your document can look a certain way. Yeah, you want to make sure your table you're using is for data. Anything that you're representing, anything information that's better represented in a table format, you can use it like that, not for layouts. Also, when you're inserting tables, the reading order the screen reader reads is left to right, top to bottom. So it kind of reads row by row all the way from the top to the bottom. Make sure your content doesn't flow a different way, like from top to bottom, then left to right. So that could probably mess up a lot of information screen readers are getting. When when you're inserting links in your document, make sure they're descriptive. Um, use phrases rather than words to be links. They should make sense when read out of context. So a big part of the accessibility is descriptive links. So if I have a lot of links on my document, I want to make sure those links make sense when they're read out of context. A lot of people use click here or more or register. A lot of just single words that can be not really descriptive. It doesn't really tell you where it's going if you don't read the rest of the sentence sometimes. So, screen readers have the ability to just have a list of all the links on the document. They don't really have to read anything else. So when you're making links, make sure you're wording it where it makes sense where it's going or what it's going to do. For example, if I remove all the context of the link, the unclear links here just say here, here, here. And if you're using here, click here a lot throughout the whole document, it's going to get to the point where the screen reader is not knowing what link is what, or if they're all related to one place, which they may not be. The other way, when you're using a descriptive link, TEA webinar registration, that kind of tells you what it is, where it's going for. TEA color contrast standards, it kind of tells you what the link is for. So that's a phrase and it's really descriptive. So sometimes you might have to reword your sentence so it can make sense when you're inserting links and making them a phrase rather than a word, a single word. Color contrast. Like I mentioned, color is a big part of accessibility. So two things you got to know about color is don't convey information with only color. And whenever you're working with color, make sure there's enough contrast between the text and the background. So the first example, you can see the bad example there. It has just color for required fields. It just has red, first name, last name, city. Somebody that's colorblind might not even see that at all. So make sure you're putting something else, kind of like an asterisk on the good example, where there's something that recognizes that it's required and it's not just relying on color to make that required. The contrast, remember, a good test you can do if you don't have the color contrast tool is if you step back a couple feet and you can see the text, it's probably okay most of the time. If it's really bad and you can't recognize it, it's not going to pass for anybody else. So that's one quick manual test, but it's not accurate. It's better if you have the tool and you can check if you're working with a lot of color and text color, so you can always have something that's accessible.